Breaking news that's shaking Westminster to its core. King Charles has just done something no British monarch has dared to do in over 300 years, and Prime Minister Starmer's government is now facing complete meltdown. What happened inside Buckingham Palace today will be studied in constitutional law classes for generations. This is the story the mainstream media is desperately trying to spin, but we're giving you the unfiltered truth. At precisely 2:15 p.m. today, Starmer walked into Buckingham Palace carrying the Digital Identity and Migration Control Bill. He expected formality, 20 minutes, a signature, royal assent granted. He brought his entire inner circle. Chief of Staff Sue Gray, Communications Director Matthew Doyle and Attorney General Victoria Prentice, they expected a rubber stamp. But if you want to see how this constitutional earthquake actually unfolded, hit that subscribe button right now, because what comes next will change everything you thought you knew about British power. King Charles refused to sign. Not delayed, not postponed, flat out refused. According to 3 palace sources present in the room, Charles looked Starmer directly in the eye and said 6 words that will echo through British history. "I cannot, in good conscience, approve this." The room went silent. Starmer's face turned scarlet. What happened next shocked even the most seasoned palace staff. The Prime Minister leaned across the ornate desk and delivered what one inquiry later described as a borderline treasonous threat. "Your Majesty, you're a ceremonial figurehead, not a politician. You will sign this bill, or I will make sure Parliament reminds you exactly what happened to kings who forgot their place." Sue Gray audibly gasped. Victoria Prentice went pale. Even Matthew Doyle, known for his aggressive tactics, looked horrified. But King Charles didn't flinch. He remained seated, hands folded, calmly on the desk, and responded with devastating precision. "Prime Minister, I have read every word of this bill. I have consulted constitutional scholars, former judges, and civil liberties experts. My decision stands." Then Charles did something extraordinary. He slid a 40-page legal opinion across the desk, written by Lord Sumption, one of Britain's most respected former Supreme Court justices. The document reportedly eviscerates the bill's legal foundations. Starmer didn't even look at it. He grabbed his briefcase, turned without the customary bow, and stormed out of Buckingham Palace. Security footage leaked just minutes ago shows him practically running to his car, rage written across his face. But here's what makes this crisis so much deeper than a constitutional standoff. While the government rushes through surveillance legislation costing £3.7 billion, British veterans are being left behind. James Richardson, a 71-year-old former Royal Marine who served in the Falklands, waited 9 months for a hip replacement. His daughter shared his story on social media, writing, "He gave everything for this country. Now he can't even walk to his letterbox." That post has been shared 47,000 times because it captures what millions of Britons feel right now. The bill Starmer wanted signed would create digital identity cards linked to immigration status, complete with facial recognition databases and biometric tracking. The technology contracts alone total £1.9 billion, awarded without competitive tender. 2 firms have direct links to Labour Party donors. 3 of the 5 companies set to profit have executives who contributed to Starmer's leadership campaign. Margaret Ellis, a retired postal worker from Yorkshire who voted Labour for 43 years, summed it up perfectly. "When the King has more compassion for ordinary people than our Prime Minister, something has gone terribly wrong. Union leaders are breaking ranks too." Sharon Graham, our General Secretary of Unite the Union, posted this evening, "Our members are asking why we're spending billions on surveillance technology when hospitals are crumbling and veterans can't get appointments." Then King Charles broke 70 years of royal protocol. At 3:47 p.m, less than 90 minutes after Starmer's exit, the palace released a formal statement written in Charles's own hand. It cited legal precedents going back to Queen Anne. Royal assent has historically been withheld when legislation fundamentally threatens the constitutional balance between Parliament, the people, and the Crown. This bill, in its current form, grants the executive unprecedented surveillance powers without proper judicial oversight. I cannot in conscience give my assent until these concerns are addressed. Professor David Blackwell from Cambridge called it the most significant assertion of monarchical authority since 1936. Palace insiders revealed that Charles spent 3 consecutive evenings this week studying the European Convention on Human Rights and consulting experts from Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Every single one warned him the bill crossed dangerous lines. The public response has been extraordinary. A Snap YouGov poll conducted between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. today shows 68% of Britons support the King's decision. Among voters over 50, support hit 79%. Even 62% of Labour voters back Charles. Starmer's approval rating has collapsed from 41% to 31% in a single afternoon. Among crucial red wall swing voters, his approval cratered to just 19%. Within an hour, protests erupted across Britain. By 6 p.m, thousands gathered outside Buckingham Palace to support the King. In Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham and Glasgow, spontaneous demonstrations brought people into the streets. Union Jacks everywhere. People of all ages chanted "God Save the King" with genuine passion. One video from Leeds shows a 92-year-old woman in a wheelchair, tears streaming down her face, holding a handmade sign. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for remembering us." That clip hit 1.8 million views in 2 hours. Social media exploded with creative expressions of support. A fish and chip shop in Hull put up a sign, "Royal Ascent Special, free chips for anyone who supports King Charles." The photo went viral with 340,000 likes. A pub in Cornwall renamed their best-selling ale Constitutional Courage. Football fans at a Newcastle match started singing "God Save the King" during halftime. These aren't organised demonstrations. These are spontaneous expressions from working class Britain, the very people Labour claims to represent. Inside number 10 Downing Street, absolute chaos has erupted. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper allegedly threw a binder across the room during an emergency cabinet meeting. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner was overheard saying, "He's finished. We need to move now before he drags the entire party down." Cabinet resignations began at 7:23 p.m. Chief Secretary to the Treasury Darren Jones resigned, his letter hitting Twitter before it reached Downing Street. "I cannot serve a Prime Minister who has so fundamentally misunderstood the British constitutional settlement." Within an hour, 3 more junior ministers followed. But here's the bombshell that could end Starmer's career. Leaked cabinet documents obtained by The Telegraph show the Prime Minister knew this confrontation was coming and planned for it deliberately. Minutes from a secret meeting 2 weeks ago allegedly reveal Starmer told radical Labour MPs, "If Charles blocks this bill, it gives us the constitutional crisis we need to reshape the monarchy for the 21st century." This wasn't a miscalculation. Starmer deliberately picked a fight with the King to advance a political agenda that would permanently weaken the crown. He completely misjudged the British people's attachment to their constitutional monarchy. One backbencher called the leaked documents political suicide written in black and white. While Starmer fights for survival, Nigel Farage is having the best day of his political life. Speaking to reporters tonight, Farage declared, "King Charles reminded us why Britain kept its monarchy when other nations threw theirs away. He reminded us that some things matter more than political expediency." The contrast with Starmer's rage couldn't be sharper. Reform UK's membership portal crashed from overwhelming traffic, with over 12,000 new sign-ups in under an hour. The party raised £1.3 million between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m, more than they raised in all of November. A Survation poll shows a political earthquake. Conservatives at 33%, Labour crashing to 24%, Reform UK surging to 26%. For the first time ever, Farage's party is within striking distance of forming a government. Major Labour donors are switching sides overnight. One former benefactor who gave £200,000 to Starmer just pledged £500,000 to Reform UK, saying, "I funded a moderate who promised stability. Instead, I got a radical who started a war with the King." The next 72 hours will determine Britain's future. Tomorrow, Parliament reconvenes for an emergency session. The 1922 committee meets tonight to discuss a motion of no confidence. If opposition parties unite with rebellious Labour MPs, Starmer could face a confidence vote Monday afternoon. Labour's National Executive Committee has scheduled a crisis meeting for Saturday, with the agenda including leadership challenge procedures. Trade unions meet this weekend to discuss whether to keep funding a party that's lost touch with working-class Britain. International allies are expressing shock. A senior US State Department official called it a disaster for Anglo-American relations. Biden's team has been trying to reach Starmer all evening. Those calls haven't been returned. The French president's office praised constitutional monarchy as a stabilising force, a clear rebuke to Starmer. At the centre stands King Charles, 75 years old, who spent his life preparing for a ceremonial role. Instead, he's become democracy's defender against a government that forgot who it serves. Palace sources say Charles is resolute. One advisor described him as heartbroken it came to this, but convinced he had no choice. The king reportedly said, "If I had signed that bill, I would have betrayed my coronation oath. I will not do that." So here's the question. Did Starmer just commit career suicide? Will Parliament side with the Crown? Could Farage actually become Prime Minister? Drop your prediction in the comments right now. Does Starmer resign this week? We read every single comment. If this shocked you, share it with everyone who needs to see what's really happening. Tomorrow, when Parliament reconvenes, the real battle begins. What happens next will be studied for decades as the moment Britain either saved its democracy or lost it forever. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. As dawn broke over London, the fallout intensified. Senior aides confirmed that emergency talks were underway between party leaders and constitutional lawyers, with Parliament preparing for what insiders described as the most volatile sitting in decades. MPS arrived early, faces grim, phones buzzing with messages from constituents demanding answers. Outside Westminster, crowds returned in greater numbers, carrying placards praising the King and condemning what they called executive overreach. The atmosphere was tense but determined, a public declaration that this confrontation was far from over. Behind closed doors, pressure mounted on the Prime Minister to step aside. Allies who had defended him only days earlier now urged him to consider resignation to prevent further damage to the party and the country. Meanwhile, King Charles remained out of sight, but palace sources said he was closely monitoring developments, resolute and unmoved. His intervention had shifted the balance of power in a way few had imagined possible, and every political calculation now revolved around that reality. By midday, speculation turned into expectation. Broadcasters spoke openly of an imminent leadership challenge, while opposition figures demanded a full inquiry into the bill and the events surrounding its rejection. Reform UK continued to capitalise on the moment, with Nigel Farage framing the crisis as proof that the political establishment had lost touch with ordinary voters. Whether Parliament would ultimately rally behind the Crown or attempt to reassert its authority remained uncertain, but one conclusion was already clear. British politics had entered a new era, and there would be no easy return to the old rules. As evening fell on Westminster, the sense of uncertainty only deepened. Corridors that were usually buzzing with routine briefings and whispered gossip were instead thick with tension. Senior civil servants spoke in hushed tones, aware that every word could be leaked, every decision scrutinised. Committees were hastily convened, emergency legal opinions commissioned, and crisis teams assembled as the machinery of government struggled to keep pace with events that were moving faster than anyone had anticipated. Long-standing assumptions about the limits of royal influence and executive authority were suddenly being questioned in real time. Across the country, the debate seeped into everyday life. In pubs, workplaces and family kitchens, people argued passionately about what the King's refusal really meant. Some saw it as a necessary check on an overreaching government, a rare moment when constitutional safeguards proved they were more than dusty conventions. Others worried about the precedent it might set, asking whether the line between ceremonial neutrality and political intervention had now been irrevocably blurred. Phone-in shows were overwhelmed, newspapers rushed out late-night digital editions, and legal analysts dominated television panels well past midnight. Inside Parliament, MPS prepared for confrontation. Draft motions were circulated, alliances quietly tested, and potential rebels counted and recounted. Whips worked frantically to shore up loyalty, while backbenchers weighed their own survival against party discipline. Several MPS privately admitted they had never received so many emails or messages in such a short span of time. Constituents were no longer speaking cautiously. They were demanding action, accountability, and clarity about where their representatives stood in a crisis that felt larger than any single bill. The judiciary, too, was drawn into the spotlight. Retired judges and constitutional experts issued carefully worded statements emphasising the gravity of the moment. Many noted that while the refusal of royal assent was rare, it was not unlawful, and that the real test would come in how Parliament chose to respond. Would lawmakers amend the bill to address the King's concerns, or would they push forward and risk tearing open a constitutional wound that had been dormant for generations? Meanwhile, the international press framed the crisis as a defining moment for Britain's democratic identity. Headlines across Europe and North America questioned whether the UK was witnessing a renaissance of constitutional monarchy or the beginning of a prolonged institutional clash. Markets reacted nervously, with the pound dipping slightly in overnight trading as investors assessed the political risk. Diplomats quietly sought reassurances that Britain's commitments abroad would remain stable amid the domestic turmoil. By the following morning, it was clear there would be no quick resolution. The Prime Minister's allies insisted he would not back down, framing the standoff as a fight for parliamentary sovereignty. His critics, both inside and outside his party, argued the opposite, claiming that sovereignty ultimately derived from the people and the constitutional framework that protected their rights. Each side believed history was on their side, and neither appeared willing to concede ground. As the day wore on, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer just about a single piece of legislation or a clash of personalities. It had become a referendum on trust, power, and the unwritten rules that had guided Britain for centuries. Whether through compromise, confrontation, or collapse, something fundamental was shifting. And as the nation watched events unfold hour by hour, one question lingered above all others. When the dust finally settled, would Britain emerge more unified in its principles or more divided than ever before? As night returned, the gravity of the moment began to sink in, even for those who had initially dismissed it as political theatre. Editorial boards convened emergency meetings, struggling to decide where they stood. Some publications that had traditionally backed the government cautiously shifted tone, acknowledging that the scale of public reaction could not be ignored. Others doubled down, warning darkly of constitutional chaos if precedent was allowed to slip unchecked. The country was no longer consuming the news passively, it was actively arguing with it, challenging it and reshaping it in real time. Within Labour headquarters, the mood was described by insiders as funereal. Strategy papers circulated that contradicted one another, reflecting a party unsure whether to defend its leader, replace him, or attempt a tactical retreat that might save face without admitting defeat. Veteran MPs spoke of déjà vu, comparing the atmosphere to previous leadership collapses when denial lingered just long enough to make the eventual fall more brutal. Younger MPs, many elected on promises of reform and transparency, openly questioned whether loyalty now meant complicity. At the same time, grassroots members began organising independently of party leadership. Local branches scheduled emergency meetings, some calling for immediate change at the top, others urging patience until Parliament had its say. Social media groups, once focused on campaigning, suddenly became forums for constitutional debate, with ordinary members sharing excerpts from legal texts and historical precedents. The sense that politics had spilled beyond Westminster and into the hands of the public was unmistakable. King Charles, though absent from the public eye, remained a constant presence in the national conversation. Commentators dissected his past speeches, charitable work, and long-standing interest in civil liberties, arguing that this moment had not come out of nowhere. Supporters portrayed him as a reluctant actor, pushed into intervention by circumstance rather than ambition. Critics, fewer but vocal, cautioned against elevating any unelected figure to the role of moral arbiter. Yet even many sceptics conceded that his measured language and reliance on legal reasoning had blunted accusations of impulsiveness. As Parliament reconvened, the chamber crackled with anticipation. The opening statements were sharper than usual, applause and heckling colliding in equal measure. When the bill was raised, the debate quickly expanded beyond its text, morphing into a wider examination of executive power, civil liberties, and the role of constitutional safeguards. MPs who had rarely spoken before took the floor, their speeches fueled by the knowledge that millions were watching and judging. Outside, the crowds held their ground. What had begun as spontaneous gatherings evolved into sustained demonstrations, marked by a curious mix of solemnity and resolve. There were no calls for violence, no signs of disorder, only a persistent insistence on being seen and heard. Volunteers handed out tea, strangers debated politely, and handwritten signs reflected a range of views united by a shared belief that something important was at stake.